is that it is not like there are no philosophical, psychoanalytical, and even religious arguments to defend the human body and her free choice. Simply, we need to deconstruct what we read and reconstruct it again through the angle of the feminine. In the title of my talk, I spoke about metafeminism and metafeminist notes. And the difference is, feminism is an activity, feminism is social justice, feminism is a cultural position, it is a political activism. By metafeminism, I mean the philosophy that is behind the ideas. And since I'm going to talk about the rights of the Gravina, if we want to talk about the right of this body psyche to make choices, we also need to look at the philosophy, at the metaphysics, at the psychoanalytical ideas and philosophical ideas that can stand and reply to arguments of, like, for example, the pro-life, anti-abortion arguments. They are using the arguments of the soul, of the spirit, and theological argument. We are coming back with human rights argument, but I think that to discuss it on the terrain of the philosophy itself is very important. And to show that some ideas about life, which circulates in philosophy of many centuries, and especially also the 20th century, and Freud and psychoanalysis, are not really about human life. And they are unhumanizing. And therefore, metafeminist note, psychic birthing and disbirthing, a language of her own. So the first metafeminist note towards humanizing the human by the way of the feminine matrixiality, which I will explain in a moment, by introducing the concept of being towards birthing with being toward birth. I want to discuss the relations of sublimations to the real, the subreal, and the corporeality of that female body with its morphology, whatever its gender is, its internal spaces, its sexual specificities, with its potentialities, whether materialized or not, and the way gravidity, pregnancy, inside the womb space, with its potential co-emergence with another, co-fading sometimes with another, border linking to the other in the inside, its losses, its birthing, enters consciousness. Via the feminine matrixial sublimation and its symbolic sphere, we can change a dimension, escape the phallic mechanism, and we can move from the subject as being towards death, which is the Heideggerian definition of the human subject. What are we? We are being towards death. And we can move to a subject, in addition, as being towards birth with being towards birthing. Another metafeminist note towards a matrixial feminine eros beyond the life drive as it is defined in psychoanalysis. If the eros in the form of resonance drive connects a being towards birth with a being toward birthing, this implies, I'm sorry, I really feel I cannot, I'm too disturbed, I'm sorry.
Yeah, me too.
Sorry, baby. All right, where have you been? If the eros in the form of resonance drive that allow us to feel and sense another beyond the threshold of consciousness connects the being towards birth with being towards birthing, this implies deconstructing and rethinking psychoanalytical concepts like death drive and life drive or eros. When for Lacan, for example, beauty is a screen that separates us from transgressing the frontier that encircle death and separate us from it, beauty engages the sublimation of a death drive. Through the feminine matrixiality, human consciousness is imprinted by traces from a kind of eros which is different from the classical life drive, and beauty relates to the sublimation of a depth space and of a passageway of co-emergence and co-fading with the other, where love and also loss in the processes of birthing, of disbirthing or miscarriage, unbirthing or abortion, and abirthing, childlessness, childfreeness, and birth. All of those can be taken into account in the matrixial dimension. Being towards birthing, in resonance with being towards birth, does not correspond to the life drive as we know it in Freud, in Lacan, and also in Deleuze and Guattari, where I claim it is in fact a death drive in disguise. The pro-life, anti-abortion arguments are motivated by and are leaning on a non-humanized life drive, which is in fact based upon a death drive, and I'm going to show it in a moment. When we read Freud's life drive in details, we see that it is based on the life of unicells, of amoeba, and basically on the life of the germ cell the germ cell which wants to continue and be immortal. And this is considered the life drive. And so when we look at it, this is the life drive of unicells that splits themselves, of amoeba, and not at all of any human or humanized life. The vital substance energized by this life drive is, according to psychoanalysis, simply the germ cell. The life drive of the germ cells of necessity ignores the life of a singular human being. It is in the service of the reproductive cells, and more precisely even, in the service of the male reproductive cells, that is in the service of units that can't be considered human subjects. I don't have the time to develop all the arguments, but they are written in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, when Freud talks about the life drive and the death drive. The whole argument, and I invite you to read Beyond the Pleasure Principle, is that life drive is based on transmitted germ cells and so on. So life drive ignores the human being. When Lacan talks about libido, which is eros, and the way eros can be understood, he in fact goes into the examples of the lamella and the amoeba and all these cells that can multiply themselves. And this means that any notion of a human subject, any notion of ethics which regards a human subject, are totally ignored in this psychoanalytical system. If we will have time, I will read to you Freud and Lacan, but let's move on. To reach a humanized life drive, we need to pass through the feminine, matrixial sphere, and bring into consideration the humanized time-slowing and processes of gestation. The womb is not a cocoon, a chrysalis left behind in the process of metamorphosis from caterpillar to butterfly. For the human pregnancy, I've chosen the term metramorphosis, not metamorphosis, to relate to processes of differentiation in jointness of the I with the non-I, to dignify a dimension in which, to signify, probably, and dignify, a dimension in which psychic processes of transmission occur, processes in their course, all partnered who participate in it, change and are changing. It is crucial for woman's freedom of choice and right and claim over her body in relation to the real of the body, the corporeality, and its imaginary, to have a language sublimated from her own specificities through which to own all the potential processes that might concern her body and its depth space. So that the phallic symbolic field couldn't control that body. If we remain only with metaphors of containers, chrysalis, metamorphosis, to relate to the human subject coming into being, contained in a maternal cocoon, and to the pre-subject development mainly in terms of processes like autopoiesis and symbiosis, we are missing something major about the human subject and its unconscious. We are missing the humanizing aspects that slowly take on embryonic biological entity and slowly turn it, or doesn't turn it, in later stages of gravidity, into a human pre-subject and a being towards birth. If we are sitting here, we have all been being towards birth, relating with and transconnected to a being towards birthing. The symbolic terms of matrixial border spacing, border linking, compassion, co-emergence, co-fading, differentiation in jointness, and finally also copoiesis, are useful for thinking a humanized gravidity and render ourselves, our body, in respect, love, the way we can listen to it, to own it, and take decisions for it. It is at that level of encounter event, a matrixial encounter event, that sometimes can end sadly or tragically or willingly. It is at the level of an encounter event that self-fragilization is valued. In self-fragilization, you become aware of the vulnerability of the other, of the non-I. So I say what we need is to look into the philosophical and psychoanalytical fields and the way they relate to our body in its joy as well as in its devastation. In this condition, in this encounter eventing of differentiating in jointness with an other, in the passage to the shock of birthing, as well as undergoing the shock of sudden loss, willed or unwilled. She who experienced gravidity and carriance, and I say carriance to emphasize that to carry is a humanized moment, while to contain, we simply need containers, but the human pregnant body psyche is in carriance. Carriance in compassion, which means there are resonance between passions that are growing. This experience often also relates to miscarriance, both to be respected. I made a difference between two notions to address the matrixial feminine sphere in the human. One relates to the resonant transconnectivity between I and non-I. I make the difference between what I call transjective and transsubjective conjunction. Transjective is the subject to object transconnectedness. Transsubjective is already the subject to subject transconnectedness. In the beginning of pregnancy, we might talk about transjectivity, the the person who carries relates to the biological substance that is evolving. Later on in pregnancy, we can start to speak about transsubjectivity, a subject to partial subject connectivity. So in each transjective and transsubjective conjunction, the Gravina is the one who can turn her sensitive response ability to a foreign awareness and responsibility and move from affective witnessing, being together with, to subjective witnessing of the process, and alone take the decisions for the intimate I and non-I corporealities and the encounter eventing in with herself. In joy and in lamentation, she deserves society's careful support. From the angle of the feminine, with the feminine, in the human, and I'm not relating, when I say the feminine, I do not relate to gender and gender choice, but to a dimension we all have to all kind of different extents, and we can become aware of. A third drive appears in the service of the humanized self with other, a drive beyond the death drive in the service of the ego, and beyond the life drive in the service of germ cells and DNA, whose push to immortality can sacrifice the human self and mask its value. So here I move from the metafeminist to a feminist note to talk about the need for differences, for a language of her own. And in this, I would like to move to something I wrote here to make it more clear, not to speak too spontaneously. Just one moment. The humanized life drive is located in the encounter between the desire of a singular body psyche gravida of any gender, female, for birthing, and the life drive described in those terms of the vitality of germ cell. That is, there is an encounter between a human desire and that desire, this life drive that Freud talks about, which is the desires of the cells that are doing their business without us. Her desire for birthing is the missing notion that the pro-life proclaims missed. And that's why they are ethically wrong. Ethic concerns the human desire of the female subject involved. The differences of the humane starts here. I don't know about if the animals, in the animal life, there is a need for the female consent, but in the humanized life, there is. The human spirit could correspond to what once upon a time, in the periods where religion was giving the note, correspond to that divine spirit or the soul. And I'm going to take you through two passages in the New Testament to show you that already in ancient time, it was absolutely clear that the desire of the female body which becomes pregnant is taken into consideration. And it is in the text, but this was erased in the name of all kind of phallic notion. And before I do that, which will be my last probably, right? Yeah, that's okay. I will say more thing to the point that my notions are considering, of course, differences. I'm not looking for any neutrality, because unfortunately any neutral term in the last 2000 years was controlled finally through the masculine paradigms, and the phallic structure of language itself and of societies itself make it that each neutral term becomes under the service of patriarchy. The desire to symbolically kill the mother, the matricidal passion of daughters, is as old as Western society itself. In psychoanalysis and psychotherapy, it is so common for the therapist to blame the patient's mother for just any pain that the subject feels, that I have suggested the term ready-made mother monster to help both patients and therapists become aware of this phantasmatic tendency and its destructive consequences for any woman, because when she becomes mother, she wants to kill herself. And I made a paper on Sylvia Plath showing that she interiorized so much the mother monster chrome that when she becomes a mother, she cannot tolerate herself. And she knows that in her due time, she will be blamed for just any pain on earth. We talked about this 9 years ago in a conference with Lisa. So this is just to remind this. Mothers are muted by generations upon generations of daughters, who too become shocked when their time arrives to become mothers, themselves suddenly objects of muteness, silencing and objecting processes. Mothers are among the most silenced in history. Postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis are self-silenced by shame and guilt. New love fragilizes us suddenly, and regrets and losses will never stop to accumulate as you transconnect to the vulnerability of the other. So rejecting the difference will be rejecting real, imaginary, and symbolic entire dimension, and in practice will lead to erase the very, very few privilege that pregnant female subjects may still have gained by lots of feminist effort, sweat, blood, and tears in terms, for example, of health care. The urgency is to think not how to abolish mother, but how to give expression to all kinds of genders in their feminine dimension of gravidity, and how to give her and ourselves a language to recognize this psychic sensibility and sensitivity that develops through pregnancy, and give these experiences a meaning, give this body a sublimatory relief. Anybody, female body, intersex body, anybody, give them a symbolic relief. And humanize our concepts of subjectivity through these aspects of difference and through the aspects of the feminine. A language of our own humanizes the subject and introduces compassion, gratitude, hope in the future, even trust, qualities without which life is unhumanizing. In my view, for the human beings, the 21st century will be feminine, for male and female and intersex, and spiritual, or it will not be. And forms of life will continue to flourish without us, because the drive life of cells and amoeba will continue, doesn't need us. So this is a kind of a prelude which I put in the end. It is said that the angel comes to Marie, divine spirit, when Elizabeth, her aunt, is 6 months pregnant. And Elizabeth is silenced because her husband couldn't understand how this could happen. And so the divine spirit muted him, made him silence. So everything that happens until the 6 months is only related to the female who is pregnant. And then in the Bible, each time there is a note that the human subject is decided in freedom, the reply to the call from God is through the notion in Hebrew of hineni, here I am. When God calls Abraham and talks with him about his alliance, he says, Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham says, hineni, here I am. I'm a freely choosing agent. And I say, yes, I want to listen, I want to know. Then when God wants to meet Moses, he says, Moses, Moshe, Moshe. And Moshe replies, hineni, here I am. So with Marie, it's the same story. The angel came, and he says he negotiated with her question of pregnancies and so on. And Marie says, hineni. In the English and French translation, it was translated in a way that you don't always see the connection. Hineni, which is, I am a free, willing, choosing person, and okay. And then she goes to Elizabeth, who is 6 months pregnant, and through their matrixial alliance between two pregnant females, she allows Elizabeth for the first time to say, also here I am. The choice is after 6 months. And Joseph, the fiancé of Marie, comes back home when she's 6 months pregnant. If he would say, that's not my child, she will be stoned. And he chose to say, you know, that's my wife and everything is fine. And she was pregnant by the Holy Spirit. But again, the 6 months, and until that moment, it is still considered a living substance that develops and is not viable outside the female body. And if it's not viable outside the female body, nobody can take stands in its name. Nobody can talk in its name. It is only this particular co-emergence that is speaking. And it is this matrixial alliance between Elizabeth and Maria which bring to the stage, finally, Jesus and St. John. And interestingly enough, St. John remembers that this is the source of his humanized coming into birth, because he says, I came here before, he's born before, but I come after. I'm after Jesus, because he was announced by another woman later than the announcement of the other born. So I would like to end on that terms and say that it is not like there are no philosophical, psychoanalytical, and even religious arguments to defend the human body and her free choice. Simply, we need to deconstruct what we read and reconstruct it again through the angle of the feminine. Thank you very much.